Hong Kong Review 82. It was a year that became a milestone in the territory's history. 1982 marked the start of the countdown to 1997 as the 5 million residents of Hong Kong pondered their future. The subject was sparked off by the visit of Britain's former Deputy Foreign Secretary, Mr. Humphrey Atkins, to Hong Kong in January, following his trip to Peking, where he'd held talks on the territory's future with Chinese officials. It was to have an immense bearing on all aspects of life in Hong Kong, particularly the business sector. Despite all the pronouncements and theories expressed on the matter, no real answers have emerged, and the confidential talks between London and Peking continue. Hong Kong had its fair share of disasters during 82, notably mid-year rainstorms that caused heavy loss of life and brought traffic chaos on the roads. It became the wettest year on record. There was an alarming trend of violent crime. The use of guns became more commonplace. 82 saw a change in governorship of Hong Kong. There were major changes in the government's policy on Vietnamese refugees, including the institution of closed camps. Hong Kong had to bear the brunt of increasing protectionist moves against her textile trade from overseas markets. District boards were established, and public elections were held. 1982 saw the departure of Hong Kong's longest-serving governor, Sir MacLehose. His governorship lasted 10 years, and he presided during a time of remarkable prosperity. He was responsible for some major changes in the Hong Kong lifestyle. He insisted on compulsory education, and he masterminded the public housing scheme. He put Hong Kong on a par with the rest of the modern world, a place which was respected by developed countries. He left as Sir Murray, but on his arrival in the United Kingdom, he became Lord MacLehose of Biok, of Maybole in the district of Kyle and Carrick, and of Victoria in Hong Kong. His departure from the territory on the 8th of May was low-key because just a few weeks earlier he suffered a mild stroke. Kit Cummings was there at Edinburgh Place to see Sir Murray off, and then Nick Beecroft takes up the story.
And the applause is for Lady MacLehose and Sir Murray MacLehose waving goodbye to everybody, the members of the public and the officials who he's just said farewell to are clapping. And this ceremony is ending rather earlier than we had expected. Should old acquaintance be forgot from the police band, most appropriate. The official party now crowding round the Lady Maureen as the official party, which includes the Chief Justice, the Deputy to the Governor, the Chief Justice Sir Dennis Roberts, the Deputy to the Governor Sir Philip Haddon-Cave, and Major General Chappell, the Commander of British Forces. They all board the Lady Maureen, which is, as one could imagine, immaculately turned out with the Governor's standard flying. And the Governor will be the last to board. It's the protocol of Governor's boarding launches that everybody else gets aboard first. And the official party, so to speak, crowding round now. The band marching towards the Lady Maureen. And we can't see, but I see the sailors casting off, and it should be a matter of a few minutes before the Lady Maureen sets off on its journey across the harbour. The photographers, the press photographers, crowding round too, so there should be some excellent photographs in tomorrow morning's newspapers of the very, very final moments of His Excellency the Governor Sir Murray MacLehose on Hong Kong Island. And the Lady Maureen is now making way. There will be no Royal Naval escort across the harbour, but there are Marine police launches in attendance, and the band continues to play Should Old Acquaintance Be Forgot, which Robert Burns, and particularly appropriate for Sir Murray, being a Scotsman. And up until now, until very recently, we thought that Sir Murray was from us going back to Scotland to live a life of comparative relaxation, and he's being the crowd is waving farewell to him, and we can't see from where we are, but Sir Murray will be on at the stern of there he is at the stern of the ship with Lady MacLehose waving, and yes, it's an emotional moment now for him. It's his last sight of so many of the people who he spent the last 10 years with. And the crowd are getting down from the stands, and many of them are waving as well.
On arrival at Kowloon, Sir Murray was driven to the airport. He He was booked on a British Airways flight, with the plane being named the City of Aberdeen. Sir Murray's doctor accompanied him on the flight, and medical equipment was on board, just in case his health faltered. But throughout the leaving ceremony, Sir Murray looked fit and well. Before entering the plane, Sir Murray had these few words to say to newsmen.
Wow. Sorry to go. Bless you all. As soon as I can.
The departure of the former governor of Hong Kong, Sir Murray MacLehose. Sir Edward Youde, the chief clerk to the Foreign Office, was appointed as the 26th governor of Hong Kong on December the 22nd last year. Sir Edward, a former British ambassador to China, arrived in the territory on the 20th of May. His appointment was particularly important because of 1997 and the need for the new governor to be closely involved in the talks over Hong Kong's future. Since arriving in Hong Kong, Sir Edward has accompanied the British Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, on her visit to Peking and has become heavily involved in the negotiations concerning 1997. In fact, Lord Belstead, the Foreign Office Minister with special responsibility for Hong Kong, said on a recent visit here that the governor should be in the negotiating team. Sir Edward was sworn in at the City Hall on the 20th of May. With his report, here's Nick Beecroft.
It was a day for pomp and ceremony, with flypasts, bands playing, and a large enthusiastic crowd applauding the governor as he set foot on Hong Kong Island. But it was also a day when Sir Edward, a self-described administrator diplomat, was reminded that there would be no shirking the main issue. In London, Sir Edward refused to be drawn on the expiry of the lease on the new territories, and as soon as he arrived in Hong Kong, he would not allow the territory to be compared in any way to the Falkland Islands. But during the welcome speech by the Chief Secretary, Sir Philip Haddon-Cave, Sir Edward was reminded that the status of the territory lay firmly on his shoulders.
We look forward to the rest of this decade and beyond with confidence, for we believe that Hong Kong will continue to surmount the difficult and the unexpected, as it has done in the past. And we believe that a prosperous and settled future for this very special place will be secured under your leadership as the Queen's representative and as the chief executive of this government.
The senior unofficial member of the Executive Council, Sir S.Y. Chung, urged the governor not to delay discussions on the lease, and he made this personal plea to Sir Edward.
Your Excellency will have many preoccupations in the administration of Hong Kong, but I hope you, sir, will agree with me that the first priority must be the question of the future of Hong Kong, which is of such concern to us all. Our continued economic prosperity and social stability are very much dependent on the confidence we, the people of Hong Kong, and our overseas trading partners have in the long-term future of Hong Kong. To maintain that confidence, it is necessary that the future of Hong Kong be satisfactorily resolved as soon as possible. It is inevitable that you, sir, as the governor of Hong Kong, will play an important role in this resolution. In your endeavors in this regard, Your Excellency can be assured of our wholehearted support.
In his speech in reply, Sir Edward was quick to praise Hong Kong's business, economic and social achievements, many of which, he said, were due to Sir Murray MacLehose. And he promised to carry on where Sir Murray left off. But he also accepted that the lease was all-important, and he expressed optimism about the future of Hong Kong.
I come at a time when many important programs are in progress on which people count for an improvement in all that can make Hong Kong desirable as a place to work and bring up a family and a city to be proud of. It will be my constant endeavor to advance these programs. To support them, there will need to be sustained economic growth and an environment in which the drive and enterprise of all those who contribute to that growth can be given full scope. For this to be achieved, Hong Kong will need confidence in its future. It is not surprising, given the circumstances of the lease, that this issue should now be raised. I believe that there are sound grounds for confidence and that the omens are good. The commitment of Her Majesty's government to Hong Kong and the interests of its people remains firm. The relationship with the People's Republic of China, on which so much depends, has never been more cordial. If there is an issue to be addressed, there is also, in addressing it, a common recognition of the vital importance of the continued prosperity and stability of this territory, and a common wish to preserve them. In consequence, I see good reason why confidence should remain high.
Earlier, shortly after his arrival at Kai Tak Airport, Sir Edward gave his first news conference as governor in Hong Kong. He faced a barrage of questions, many of which he didn't want to answer before he had a chance to get to know Hong Kong and the people better. But he gave this pledge.
You can be quite assured that I will stand up for Hong Kong interests. As you say, Sir Murray did so, and I expect to continue doing the same thing. I don't think it's true that the British government is not interested in Hong Kong. On the contrary, I've talked to a very large number of people over the last few months about Hong Kong affairs, and there is indeed a very strong and sympathetic interest in the United Kingdom and among members of the British government in Hong Kong. I have seen that. As I think I've mentioned before, a number of the issues which have arisen are general issues. They were not specifically directed against Hong Kong, although they did affect Hong Kong. But you may be assured that when issues such as that do arise, I will do my best to represent Hong Kong's interests to the British government, both intelligently and vigorously. And I think it will be quite understood in London that I should do so.
Questioners hoped that Sir Edward would define the areas which he felt needed special attention, and perhaps give some idea of his plans for the future development of Hong Kong, but he declined to reveal his hand.
I've done a lot of study of Hong Kong issues in the months which I've been spending studying Hong Kong, both in particular and its position in the world and the world economy. But I made a decision that I would not come to a conclusion on what priorities I should adopt until I had arrived. I think it always a good practice to get there and to talk to the people who are concerned with the issues before you come to firm conclusions. So although I may have ideas, I would much rather consult people here first about those ideas before I come to conclusions on what those priorities should be.
Sir Edward did give some idea about how he regarded the position of Hong Kong in the modern world, and how it could not be relegated to being a colonial backwater.
Obviously, Hong Kong has grown into a place which is, I think it's fair to say, unique. And it's a unique phenomenon. Its economic growth and all those programs which have gone so well here have given it a place in the world which is a very important place. So I think that I wouldn't look at Hong Kong in the old-fashioned terms. I will certainly try to look at Hong Kong in the terms of Hong Kong as it is today, which I think is a very remarkable place.
Mrs. Thatcher became the first British Prime Minister in office to visit Hong Kong when she arrived in the territory on the 26th of September. Hong Kong was the last leg of her Far East tour, which took in Japan and China. In Japan, she did her best to promote British industry, while in China she continued this tack, but more important, she was in Peking to kick off formal discussions over the future of Hong Kong.
Mrs. Thatcher's visit to China was seen as a dress rehearsal for her tour of Hong Kong. 1997 was the big issue, and people in Hong Kong were anxious to see how the British Prime Minister would handle the Chinese authorities. But it was the Chinese who gained the first ground when the Premier, Mr. Zhao Ziyang, announced that China intended to regain sovereignty over Hong Kong. But he said such a move would not affect the prosperity and stability of the territory. He said China would definitely adopt the policies and measures to safeguard Hong Kong's prosperous economy. After the talks in Peking, it was announced that Britain and China had agreed to continue discussions about the future of the territory through diplomatic channels. After Peking, Mrs. Thatcher visited Shanghai and Canton. While in Hong Kong, she met members of UMILCO, as well as army personnel and Hong Kong Chinese seamen. She gave a speech to top businessmen, visited the Kwai Chung container terminal, and officially opened the Castle PK power station. The highlight of her tour was her news conference, when she was closely questioned on the future of Hong Kong.
You know the Chinese view on sovereignty. They've expressed it many times. You know the British view. You know that treaties are made to be kept. And it is best, under those circumstances where each side has its respective view, to enter into talks so that we can arrive at an agreed solution. That is exactly what we shall do. It will take some time, and we shall have to go about it steadily until we reach a solution which is acceptable to China, to the people of Hong Kong, and to Britain. These kind of negotiations are not unknown, and they do achieve success if we persist in our objective.
She assured the people of Hong Kong that whichever political party was in power in Britain, they all agreed that an acceptable solution would have to be found. She said that it was important that a solution was agreed upon before 1997, when the lease on the new territories expired. And she was adamant that there was no way that Britain or China could ignore the existence of the 3 treaties which the 2 countries had signed.
I believe they are valid at international law. And you can't, if countries try just to abrogate treaties like that, then it is very serious indeed. Because if a country will not stand by one treaty, it would not stand by another treaty. And that's why you enter into talks, because it's better, if you've got differences between 2 sides, to agree to vary them in a way satisfactory to all, than for anyone to consider unilateral abrogation.
As in Peking, Mrs. Thatcher was questioned closely about the details of the diplomatic discussions which would now be held about Hong Kong's future. And once again, she refused to disclose how these talks would proceed, saying that confidentiality was necessary if the negotiations were to succeed. The Prime Minister did concede that Hong Kong would have to be kept abreast of what was going on between Britain and China.
I think you have to maintain confidentiality. One has been involved in a number of negotiations before, but that doesn't mean to say that there'll be no statements of any kind during the talks. Of course, one couldn't just go into talks and say nothing, but the actual negotiations and talks must themselves be confidential. But of course, as soon as we have anything to say, we will keep in touch and give the news. Again, one is accustomed to doing this, so don't think that it means nothing from the start of the talks until the conclusion. It wouldn't be possible in a democratic society to do that.
Despite Mrs. Thatcher's assurances about the future of Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index lost 84 points on the day of her news conference, and the United States dollar strengthened against its Hong Kong counterpart, reaching $6.20. Mrs. Thatcher was unperturbed.
Hong Kong is a sensitive place, and in a sensitive place, you would expect the market to fluctuate. I do not think that I would conclude too much from what has happened on one day. You are familiar with markets, so am I.
Mrs. Thatcher left town before she had time to comment on the market's reaction on the following days. By Friday of that week, the Hang Seng Index had tumbled from well over the 1,000 mark down to 883. That bearish trend has not stopped since. Here's Alan Hargraves.
At this time last year, the Hong Kong stock market was hardly bullish, but with the Hang Seng Index at 1,400 points, prices were still buoyant. Hong Kong Land had just swooped on the telephone company, some major land deals were still in the offing, and Hong Kong seemed blissfully unaware of the international recession. Since then, most share prices have about halved, and some of the more spectacular falls in the property sector have almost entirely stripped shares of their value. Carrion stock, for example, is now worth about 15% of what it was this time last year. But most of the downturn had its effect in the second half of the year. Even in March, when Financial Secretary John Bremridge made his budget speech, he forecast that the Hong Kong economy was not going to do as well as the year before, but it would still steam along with a growth rate of 8%, a figure he was to cut in half by August. The stock market perked up briefly not long after the budget speech when Hong Kong Land struck again, this time taking out the electric company. That was about the last piece of bull news to hit the market. In fact, at the time it was billed as a move into recurrent earnings that would help buffer Land from worsening property prices. And worsen they did. Although Mrs. Thatcher's visit may have highlighted the tumble, it was unlikely that Hong Kong's stock, property and money markets could have gone anywhere other than down. For a town that depends almost entirely on trade for its prosperity, the slowdown in export performance began to bite by mid-year. That followed through on the property market where, following the euphoria of the now legendary Hong Kong property boom, supply of just about all forms of real estate far outstripped faltering demand. The old market cliché that you can never buy at the top and you can never sell at the bottom still stands, but it seems that those who got as close to either are now the survivors. But while it's easy with hindsight to say that we all should have known it was coming, this time last year people were saying that property prices were likely only to level off, when the fundamental economics of Hong Kong and its well-documented business cycle made it clear that what had gone up so high had to come down so low. In 1982, economic theory reasserted itself with a vengeance. The complicating factor has been 1997, but many observers feel that even without that complication, the Hang Seng Index, the Hong Kong dollar and local property would be worth about what they are now. Hong Kong Land's Trevor Bedford is one of them.
I think there's far too much of what's going on being ascribed to political reasons in 1997 and all that, and I'm firmly of the view, often expressed, that the less said by people about this, the better. Certainly we will not stop speculation, but ill-informed gossip and ill-informed statements, as people from emerging China, don't help the situation at all. I've said consistently that what we're seeing here is basically economic, i.e. in the property market we've had excesses, we've had a bull property market for a long time, undue speculation, and there's now oversupply and under-demand. That will subsist for some time. And as and when the oversupply gets taken up and demand meets supply, then the property market will start to raise again. But again, this is going to take, in my view, at least 18 months to 2 years. But we've seen this before, and it will rise again.
How long it will be before it does rise again is an open question. For that matter, the dust has not yet settled on the fall. Clouds still hang over former high flyer Carrion Investments. Having enjoyed the mystique of being a canny-on seller on the way up, backed by offshore smart money, it didn't perform so well on the way down. What's emerging now is a picture not of a company founded on massive and mysterious flight capital, but rather a group of shareholders of more modest means who were able to secure massive borrowings from local and foreign financiers. The security behind those loans, where there was any, is now grossly devalued property and seemingly worthless scrip. Nor is it clear what will happen to the empire of a former close associate of Carrion, Mr. C.M. Chung. His main public vehicle, Youde Investments, technically moved in and out of receivership last week, and a High Court injunction has frozen most of his assets. His son ended up in debtor's prison, and bankers are currently trying to get back thousands of millions of dollars they lent to his brother's companies, Iksan and Iwa Realty. The financial sector also went through what the Banking Commissioner Colin Martin called a mini-crisis. That too was partly sparked by the property slump when foreign banks, scared by the problems of Carrion and Youde, also withdrew credit lines they had out to some DTCs. That added yet more businesses to the list of those facing, to use the now hackneyed term, serious liquidity problems. And while all that was happening, the Securities Commission was spending much of its time suspending commodity traders at an average rate of one a month for the whole year. Add to that a run on the Hang Lung Bank, the collapse of Chirleyun Jewellery, and a looming government deficit, and 1982 is fast looking like one of those years that marks the low points of Hong Kong's business cycle. Already, people are saying that it was all a healthy shakeout that was well overdue. But if that was a tough year, how will the next one be? Trevor Bedford.
Tough. Tougher. As tough. But hopefully it's a year where we'll have learnt lessons. We'll have tied up a few loose ends. We'll get business back on a sort of slightly sounder footing. It will be less frenetic. And I think if the market settles down, as I think it will, I think if worldwide recession begins to bottom out, I think it's a year which towards the end we can look forward to it with confidence. And indeed, this is the name of the game in Hong Kong. We have to look forward to it with confidence anyhow.
The worldwide recessions meant quite a rough year for trade and industry matters in Hong Kong. Rising unemployment and cutbacks in local industry as it tried to diversify from the traditional bias on textiles, and the negotiators' nightmare of a new multi-fibre arrangement, plus bilateral textile agreements with Hong Kong's major markets in the United States and the EEC. And all this took place in the hostile atmosphere of growing world trade protectionism, as governments in the West came under immense internal pressures from growing unemployment and drops in production. The Secretary for Trade and Industry, Mr. Bill Dorward, summed up 82 to Lorna Workman.
I would say that the negotiations we've had to conduct this year have been the roughest in the 20-year history of these restraints on our trade. We also had what became something of a cause célèbre, the French restrictions on the import of watches. That's continued throughout the year. It still continues, and we have lodged, at the end of some rather fruitless negotiations with the EEC on behalf of France, to try to get rid of these restrictions, a formal complaint with the GATT, and hearings as we speak are being held in Geneva, and they will continue through the first couple of months of next year. So the effect of protectionism has been on the climate in which we've had to negotiate our major textile agreements. It has undoubtedly affected the content of these agreements. I'd like to pay tribute to our negotiators, who I think did an absolutely outstanding job and managed to claw back in these negotiations a great deal. There's much more to it than horse trading over crude numbers. And our fellows happen to be extremely expert in getting the fine print written in such a way that it means a great deal in terms of dollars and cents to us.
Would you say that the agreements with particularly America and the EEC on textiles were clawbacks, or can they be seen in terms of victories?
That depends on whether you see a glass as being half full or half empty. In the circumstances in which we were negotiating, I think I would regard them as victories, because we were up against, after all, the two major economic powers in the world, and we don't have a great deal of clout. I think we managed to salvage, and I'm afraid I've got to use that term because we were in a very serious situation. We managed to salvage a great deal.
The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade is now studying the future of the MFA. Do you feel that the MFA has outlived its usefulness, as it appears to have been ignored by several countries this year?
The trouble with the MFA is not that it is inadequate, but that it is inadequately respected. For some years past, it seems to me, nobody's bothered to read it. It seems to me that there was always a vast area of doubt as to whether it was ever justified in the first place. The question really must be asked today whether the textile sector is so special that it deserves an agreement all of its own. The only reason it was introduced was because the textile industry in the Western countries was the biggest employer of labor and was the one first hit by competition from the developing countries back in the 60s. But that situation is no longer true. There are many other industries which are in the same position. And whether or not there is a case for some discriminatory or selective process of trade restrictions in the field of textiles is, to my mind, an open question. I think it's one that the countries concerned will address over the next few years, and I don't think we'll see any dramatic change by the time the present MFA runs out in another 3.5 years. But provided the recessionary period is over, I think we will see us moving gradually toward a more sensible, rational treatment of this particular sector, particularly since it will have run down so much in the Western countries by that time.
Textiles is undisputably important to Hong Kong, but it's one of the first industries to have been hit by this recession. How successful do you feel your department's been in trying to persuade Hong Kong to diversify?
We don't claim, I think, to have persuaded Hong Kong to diversify. What we try to do is create the situation in which diversification is encouraged. And I think that that's worked fairly well. The credit goes to the entrepreneur, not to the government. I think we've been fairly successful in attracting a degree of overseas investment into Hong Kong industry and, perhaps more important, overseas technology. We are moving on the right lines now to create the right kind of background, provide the right kind of backup facilities which are necessary to encourage industrialists to branch out. We've managed to break the back of the industrial land problem, which was always a big bugbear in Hong Kong, but no one can complain today that land is a serious inhibition to industrial development. We've got more industrial space available than we've ever had in our history. We've just pushed up the supply to the point where now there is an abundance of supply of industrial land. So that's how diversification is encouraged, and I think has taken place. One only has to look at the success and the new developments in the electronics industry.
And what about the question of the territory's future? Has it affected us so far, investment in Hong Kong, confidence in its future?
It's very hard to say because no one has to tell us what they're investing in industry. I think probably there's been a slowdown, not so much in new investment as in reinvestment. But certainly we've had some very encouraging responses in the last few months to our industrial promotion activities. We've had several quite substantial new industrial ventures start in Hong Kong this year with overseas participation. I'm personally hopeful we'll be able to maintain a good quality of investment. I don't know about volume, but we'll be able to maintain a good quality of investment over the coming year.
What do you see as the live prospects or the pitfalls for trade and industry in 1983?
The biggest single issue facing us in the trade policy field is the negotiations which are going to go on in Geneva with a target date of November 1983 for their completion on an improvement of what is known as the safeguards provisions of the GATT. It's a rather esoteric subject. To put it in its simplest terms, if it went the wrong way, and there's a lot of pressure from the developed countries for it to go what we see as being the wrong way, it would have something like the effect of extending the kind of restrictions we've faced on textiles for so long to our other major export industries. And that, I think, would be very harmful. Our representatives in Geneva are going to have to be very light on our feet and very firm and very careful in our coordination with the other countries with similar interests to resist the deterioration of world trade rules to the point where Hong Kong would become very vulnerable.
Any bright spots on the horizon?
I'm not a Pollyanna by nature. I think some of the signs coming out of the United States are that there's a slight quickening of consumer demand, and it's amazing how quickly that kind of thing feeds back into the Hong Kong system. And it's amazing how quickly confidence in Hong Kong builds. Hong Kong's confidence in itself builds. And I think that we can certainly expect during 1983 to see the old export engine roaring away again.
On Hong Kong's transport scene, motorists found car ownership a much more expensive business when the Secretary for Transport, Alan Scott, upped first registration tax and motor vehicle licence fees. But for Kowloon commuters, the Kowloon Canton Railway launched its electrified service, and late in the year the KCR was transformed into a corporation. Meanwhile, under Hong Kong, the mass transit railway tunnelled along with new extensions, although not without facing a few problems. Here's Alan Hargreaves.
The mass transit railway was hardly out of the news for most of the year. 1982 saw the opening of the Tsuen extension with the addition of 10 more stations. Across the harbour, the Island Line proceeded on schedule, and by year-end, the peak hour service had moved up to a maximum 2-minute headway between trains. Even cake shops started appearing on MTR concourses, and one passenger who got on the railway got off at the other end with a newborn child. At the end of the year, when concern began to mount over the financing of the railway, the MTR got up and said it would post a cash surplus. Chairman of the corporation, Norman Thompson, told us that at least in terms of operations, there could even be a profit by the end of 1984.
This year, we'll make a cash surplus overall after taking into account some 300 million property development profits. We estimate that our deficit on the railway operation alone will reduce this year from 371 million, as it was in 81, to 160 million this year, in round figures. And then there's 300 million coming in from property development cash surplus. So overall, we'll have a cash surplus. That, of course, takes into account the one-off effect, as you might say, of property development surpluses. But by 1984, in 2 years' time, there's no reason why the railway should not be showing a cash surplus, indeed possibly even a profit on railway operations alone.
But the MTR also found itself caught up in the property slide. Original estimates had projected that as much as 50% of the cost of the Island Line would be met by selling off the airspace above the station's property development. And after a series of tough negotiations, consortia led by the Hung Lung Development Group were awarded rights to develop the greater part of the Island Line sites. Although that decision surprised many, including rival developers, the MTR appeared to have driven a good deal. But cracks began to appear in that as soon as property prices began to tumble. Hung Lung chairman Mr. T.H. Chan at one stage was able to say that because of the way the sites would be valued, the company was somehow buffered from sliding property prices, a statement that drew the ire of the developers who had lost out and led to some debate when the pricing of Cotton Tree House seemed to prove his point. But by November, when it was time to pay the premium for Admiralty Lot 2, the price of $1,800 million was so far out of step with the market that Hung Lung decided that to go ahead with that project would be guaranteeing itself a loss. Eventually, the group decided not to. The consortium's decision was probably also helped by the fact that the Chung family-controlled companies, Iksan and Iwa Realties and Associated Hotels, all consortium members, made public their serious financial problems. With the property market down and development profits not likely in the immediate future, people started to wonder who was going to pay for the railway. Mr. Thompson, though concerned, is confident that by the time the majority of sites reach development stage, prices will have recovered somewhat. Even if they don't, he says it will mean the cost of the MTR will finally be paid off only 3 years later than originally planned in 1996. But with no profit until the property market recovers, will he need some bridging finance over the next few years?
Oh, yes, we will. We had always assumed, as I've mentioned, we don't start our superstructures for the large part until 1985, so there was always bridging finance. If indeed the property market is a little slower, then undoubtedly there'll be more bridging finance. And if indeed the property market recovers very slowly indeed, then we'll have to borrow more than we originally anticipated. And that is, after a series of assumptions, produces the delay from 1993 to 1996. In that event, when it hasn't happened, and I don't think it will happen, but in that event, it would be a disappointment, which is by no means a disaster.
Having said that, does Mr. Thompson feel, with hindsight, that it might all have been easier if, in granting development rights, the MTR had not put all its eggs in the one Hung Lung basket?
Well, it isn't all the eggs. There are still a number of properties still to go. But yes, we went with 3 separate consortia, each of which was led by Hang Lung. We did our best to engage 3 separate consortia, obviously. It is better to spread the risk. There isn't that much risk involved because we do have joint and several guarantees from the members of the consortia. But the simple answer to your question is that at that time, the only acceptable offers that we received were from that consortium. You might say that at that time, the only people who were prepared to put their money where their mouth is was the Hang Lung consortia. And in this way, we managed to obtain substantial front-end payments that were not available from any of the other property developers in town, which has helped us greatly in this time of difficulty over the last 2 or 3 months.
In any case, Mr. Thompson won't be with us much longer. He's just sold his yacht, and in March he's off to London, where he's setting up a consultancy which already has its first client. Mr. Thompson will soon be advising Singapore on the financing of its new subway.
You're listening to Review 82 from RTHK's newsroom. As far as Hong Kong's crime scene is concerned, 1982 has been the year of the gun. The emergence of armed robbers and their tendency to use their weapons has brought 31 robberies where guns were used in the first 11 months of the year, and this month there have been at least 4 more. Lorna Workman and Warren Rook round up the major crimes of 82.
Like magpies, this new breed of violent criminal likes things that glitter, and jewellery and goldsmith shops have been singled out as targets. 33 were robbed in the first 11 months of the year, and during 1982 the police and insurance companies tried every possible means to persuade owners to install and use alarms and other security measures. But an estimated 20% have stubbornly resisted ways to ensure the safety of their stock, staff and the public. The growing tendency for criminals to use guns was reflected in the crimes that hit the headlines.
May was memorable. On the 3rd, $10 million was hijacked by 4 armed men in Hong Kong's biggest ever cash robbery. It was taken from 4 men transporting the money from Kai Tak Airport. The next day, $5 million in jewellery was snatched from a shop in Prince's Building by 3 men with guns who had held up the staff. Then on the 6th came one of Hong Kong's most infamous robberies at a jade shop in Canton Road. 4 armed men held up the shop, killed the owner, seriously injured 3 other people, and got away with over $1 million in jade.
2 weeks later, on the 18th of May, a shot was fired by gunmen who held up a jewellery shop in the New World Centre and took gems worth $2 million. No one was hurt. The Police Special Crimes Division mounted one of the largest operations ever undertaken, and after intensive inquiries, 6 men were charged with the Canton Road and New World Centre hauls, plus 4 other armed robberies over a 2-year period. They stand trial in the new year.
After the madness of May, the next headliner was in October, when a guard working for Hong Kong security disappeared with $1 million, while he and colleagues were withdrawing money from a bank in Central. He was spotted several weeks later getting into a taxi at the Star Ferry, and when arrested was carrying $500,000 in cash. Mr. Fong Tin Chung got 5 years in prison. But this month has seen its fair share of the year's worst crimes.
On the 12th, 3 well-dressed men strolled into Falconer Jewellers in the Peninsula Hotel Arcade, held up staff and a security guard at gunpoint, and coolly walked away with $5.5 million worth of goods. Their stolen getaway car was found the same day, and Special Crimes are still working on this one. On the 17th came the raid on 3 security guards taking money to a bank in Sha Kok Estate in Sha Tin. They were waiting for a lift when 3 armed men ambushed them, shot 1 guard, snatched his shotgun and a bag containing $350,000. The 2 others ran after the robbers and were joined by 2 detectives who opened fire at the fleeing men and were shot at in return. No one else was injured, but the 3 got away.
Then on December the 20th, yet another jewellery shop was hit. This time, 4 armed men got away with $10 million in gems from a shop in Queens Road Central after injuring 3 people. But the increase in armed, violent hold-ups hasn't gone unnoticed by the authorities. Judges have expressed their concern and have imposed heavier sentence on gun-toters. The police and customs officials have marshalled all resources to try and stop guns being smuggled into Hong Kong, particularly from China, where the most popular weapons are converted starting pistol. And intelligence has brought in what must constitute almost an arsenal of weapons in raids during 1982.
Another disturbing fact of 82 is the emergence of illegal immigrants or recent arrivals in armed crime. They may only be statistically responsible for about 11% of total crime, but most of these cases are violent, and many don't think twice about carrying a gun and using it.
The number of murders in Hong Kong does appear to be lower than in 1981, at least so far. 89 people were murdered up till December the 1st, but many of these were gruesome and shocking killings.
One warm June afternoon, a man ran wild through Un Chau Estate in Cheung Sa Wan, wielding a knife which left 45 people injured and resulted in 6 deaths. He'd burst into a crowded kindergarten where dozens of toddlers were stabbed and 4, 2 boys and 2 girls, died from their injuries. A woman and a teenage girl in a flat on the estate were also killed, and the man was stopped only by a policeman's bullet. A man called Li Chi Hang, a former mental patient, has been charged with the murders and is on remand in Castle Peak Hospital awaiting trial. The tragedy provoked a public outcry, and a government working party is now studying services for ex-mental patients.
In August came the so-called torso murders. The police raided a To Kwa Wan flat and made the grisly find of jars containing various preserved female organs. 2 brothers were charged with murder, but charges were dropped against the younger man. Now a taxi driver, Lam Kor Wan, faces 4 counts of murder over 18 months when he stands trial.
A month later, on the 29th of September, came the shocking discovery by a Causeway Bay businessman who returned home from work to his luxury home at Hong Lok Yun near Tai Po. When there was no reply to his calls, he rushed upstairs to find his son, aged 4, and 8-year-old daughter had been hung from shower curtain rails in the bathrooms. Downstairs, his wife's body was in a closet. She'd been strangled. A stonemason called Keung Sin Chi was arrested and charged with the murders. He faces trial committal proceedings early in January.
From crime to refugees. It's been a disappointing year for both Vietnamese refugees and the government and United Nations officials responsible for them. The number of resettlement places offered by overseas countries dropped by more than half, while the actual arrival rate of boat people showed only a slight decline. The resulting pressure felt by the refugees themselves, many of whom have been in Hong Kong camps for more than 3 years now, fired a series of ugly riots. The government's response to the continuing high rate of incoming boat people was the introduction of closed camps operated by the Correctional Services Department. Mr. Raymond Hall, the Deputy Head of Mission for the United Nations High Commission for Refugees here, detailed Hong Kong's refugee position to Glynis Green.
This has been part of a regional pattern. The main development in the course of 1982 has been a very noticeable drop-off in the number of boat arrivals in the region. From 74,000 for the whole year of 1981 and 74,000 for the whole year of 1980, in 1982 we've come down to 44,000 arrivals. The departure rate has at the same time dropped off considerably, and this has also been an important element in the developments here in Hong Kong. The number of boat people coming into Hong Kong has not registered the same percentage of drop as in the region as a whole. We have had slightly less arrivals here this year than we did last year, but we haven't enjoyed the great decrease in influx that we've seen in regional terms. On the other hand, resettlement has become progressively tighter and tighter. In the early part of the year this was not so noticeable, but over the last 6 months of this year we've had a lot of problems in terms of resettlement. Finding resettlement places is, of course, as time goes by, getting increasingly difficult.
Why is it that Hong Kong statistics on boat people fail to follow the regional trends? We're having fewer resettlement places offered to refugees in Hong Kong. We're having a smaller drop in arrivals.
I think it's very difficult to answer this question in terms of the arrival trend. The arrival trend has begun to drop off in Hong Kong, and the regional trend may register here eventually. That's a very difficult question to speculate on, as arrivals are obviously something which are very hard to predict. I think that the trend has begun to register here, but on the other hand, most of our arrivals here in Hong Kong are people who come from isolated rural settings, small villages close to the coast in the rural areas of central Vietnam. And I think trends here possibly register more slowly than they do in the more urbanized areas around Saigon. Information gets back much more slowly to these people, so possibly a trend is not so quick in developing. As far as departures are concerned, resettlement is tight in Hong Kong, but there again it's tight in the region as a whole. I don't think we can say that Hong Kong is doing that much worse than the region by and large.
Just what effect then do you think the government's closed camp policy introduced in July has had on refugee arrivals this year?
Once again, difficult to say. The number of arrivals has certainly come down, though not that dramatically, since the government introduced its closed camp policy on the 2nd of July. This decrease in arrivals may be the result of the closed camps, who knows? On the other hand, it may simply be the registering in Hong Kong of an already existing lower trend in the region as a whole. So to say that the decrease in new arrivals is a direct result of the closed camp policy is not possible.
Pleas have been made both by the UNHCR and individual governments, such as the Hong Kong government and the Thai government, to Western countries to take more refugees for resettlement. Do you think these pleas are going to have much impact next year, particularly in terms of the economic recession?
I think that quotas will remain tight next year. We can't see it purely in terms of quotas, as many countries come up with special programs which are not specific quotas. We have had various countries in the late part of 1982 focus on particularly difficult parts of our caseload, such as handicapped and very old, difficult to resettle cases. We've had some successes here. I think we can expect to see that continue in early 1983, with countries coming forward with special offers of assistance. However, many countries appear to be focusing more on the selection of smaller numbers of difficult cases rather than going for the large numbers. I don't think we'll see any establishment of extremely large quotas in 1983. Indeed, they're not really called for. After all, we do only have a caseload of 13,000 here in Hong Kong, which is troublesome, particularly for the Hong Kong government, but it's not an extremely large caseload, and we cannot expect a caseload of that size to generate very large resettlement quotas, which may, in fact, in themselves eventually result in attracting more people from Vietnam.
Attitudes in the Hong Kong community have tended to toughen over this year towards Vietnamese refugees. Do you think the government may be forced next year to take an even tougher stance itself on the refugee problem, perhaps enforce repatriation?
I don't think the government would consider forcing repatriation. Of course, one of the principles of UNHCR is that repatriation should be voluntary. It's our preferred solution to all refugee problems. I don't think that the government is contemplating forced repatriation.
1982 is going to close with about 13,000 refugees in Hong Kong. What is 1983 going to hold in terms of figures?
I think a more or less stable caseload. I can't see it increasing dramatically in the first part of the year, which is traditionally low in arrivals. We don't come into our traditional high arrival season until the months of April and May. It will depend very much on what that high arrival season brings. If the trend in regional arrivals continues and these continue to tail off, if this registers more strongly in Hong Kong, then maybe in our next high arrival season, without being wildly optimistic, we'll have considerably lower numbers coming in. We will continue to have resettlement, we'll continue to have people leaving Hong Kong. So I sincerely hope that we will still be able to talk in terms of a declining caseload.
1982 was a record year weather-wise, with the Royal Observatory pronouncing the year the wettest since records began in Hong Kong in 1884. The worst months were June and August, which brought chaos and death to the territory. Here's Lorna Workman.
After the drought and water rationing of last year, 1982 saw the heavens open, and open, and open. Although we weren't hit by any typhoons this year, the period between May the 28th and the 2nd of June brought 258 millimetres. Landslips were endemic, and 28 people died during the 5 days, with 2,500 forced from their homes into government emergency shelters. Then came August, the wettest month on record in the wettest year on record. 872 millimetres of rain fell at the tail end of severe tropical storm Dot. 6 people died in landslips and other weather-related accidents, and 1,000 were made homeless. Thousands of acres of farmland were flooded, resulting in widespread crop damage and losses of livestock, particularly in the new territories, where farmers had to be compensated with $4 million in relief aid over the year. The government had to swing into action on many occasions to try and make large and unstable slopes safe, but the largest slide was in Butterfly Valley, where a chunk of hillside blocked over 1,000 feet of Ching Cheng Road for months, causing widespread traffic chaos. Coming into the normally dry season, Hong Kong came under a deluge in November when rainfall was 176% above normal and brought the total rainfall for the first 11 months of the year to a staggering 3,174.4 millimetres, Hong Kong's watertight record for 1982.
A landmark in government was achieved during the year with the establishment of district boards and public elections for board members. It's hoped that this will pave the way for greater public participation in determining important issues in Hong Kong. The Secretary for City and New Territories Administration, Mr. David Akers-Jones, gave his assessment of the elections and the board's future to Lorna Workman.
I think it was very important that 300,000 odd people came out and cast their vote in these elections, and this was a success beyond our expectations. The district boards have a very wide remit, and of course this is just the beginning of their work. Their contribution to the life of Hong Kong in the future will be enormous.
How would you counter the attack that they will not actually do anything when it comes to decision-making and policy-making affecting the people of Hong Kong?
Well, during the last month I've been going around the district boards and asking them how they think of their work and the work of the boards, and all the members are very happy with their work so far and the things that they have been able to achieve. These are not things which make the headlines, but out there in the districts they are important.
They're dealing at the moment specifically with smaller matters. Do you see them expanding their role in any way during 1983?
I think they will have an important contribution to make to ideas on matters which affect the people generally, perhaps problems affecting education, transport and so on. that the views of the district board members will be very valuable in making policies in future.
Do you see them purely as a feedback system or as a good gauge of public opinion, which is much preferable to perhaps doing a survey?
Oh, I think it is. We'll get a real expression of opinion from people who've been elected by the people speaking in public. And this, I think, will be very useful to government in shaping its future policies.
Does this include in shaping the future of the territory?
No, I didn't say that, but I think it is important at this time that Hong Kong, which is becoming an increasingly complex society and which is becoming a very developed territory, have an integrated system of administration.
Do you see their establishment and their future as being a step towards a different type of democracy in Hong Kong?
I think it's too early yet to make any predictions about the way the district boards will develop. We tend to do what is necessary and to see how it evolves, and then to change our approach to the future in the light of what has happened.
Review 82. Interviews and reports from RTHK's newsroom staff: Lorna Workman, Glynis Green, Nick Beecroft, Alan Hargraves, Kit Cummings and Warren Rook.